I'm very impacted by things that I hear. The leader of that, the pastor that led that training and that education, said that you are God's ambassador here for your children, for anybody else that you're associated with.
Yeah.
And I already knew that my purpose in life and here is to serve.
Hello, welcome to another episode of the Mighty Oak Show. So glad to have you with us again. And as we get into this year, excited about all that we'll bring to you. We've got a lot of content that's coming online for you, which means if you are not yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, that's where you need to start. Hit the subscribe button. Then go from there over to the notification button or the notification bell to let you know when more content comes online. And we talk about this all the time, but that YouTube channel really is for you. We produce so much content there. From this show, we have other shows that deal with various subjects of life and trauma and military and not military. We have testimonials from people who have struggled and have found some hope on the other side of that. So much content there. You need to make sure you're plugged into that. If you're listening to the podcast or listening over at Mojo 50, again, thank you so much for listening and for sharing this content out. Very glad to have you with us. Take some time after this show to go over to the YouTube channel, search for the Mighty Oaks Foundation, Mighty Oaks Show, and you'll find us there. Subscribe, hit the notification bell. Leave us a comment if you'd like to, and share this content out. It has proven to be helpful to some folks, and maybe to you as well, and would love to have you share that. Again, thank you for joining us today. Today, looking forward to this conversation with a longtime friend and certainly supporter of the Mighty Oaks Foundation. Gary Wright is here. Gary, thank you.
Thank you
for coming in.
Asking me.
Yeah, I was telling Gary before we started, we've talked so much over the years, I thought that we had already done a show together, but we hadn't, so here we are. Gary is a friend and really became a friend through Mighty Oaks and the work that we do here at Mighty Oaks. Retired Marine, we'll talk about that in a moment. But Gary has been one of our early volunteers, and we'll talk about that too, and all the things we've been able to do through our relationship. Yeah. And now, among other things, this is probably not the most important thing in your life, but among other things, takes care of our IT needs here at the Mighty Oaks Foundation.
That's actually can be rather big.
It's a big deal. It's certainly a big deal to us, and we never notice it until it all goes down.
It keeps things like this program continuing to go, I hope.
Things like this program going. We moved into this office, I guess about 2 years ago now.
Has been, I thought it had been about 3 years. But
yeah, it's been a couple years.
Right.
And when we did, I said, it'll be fine. We'll just throw a router over in the corner. And you said, that's not how any of this works. So we've had a great relationship, but among other things, and there's so many things that we have connecting points on. You've been a part of our program. You've attended our program. You've gotten people into the program, yep, and have a great story yourself. So I wanted to talk about that. Let's start in the beginning. Talk about where you grew up, and not all the way. You can go all the way back to the beginning, but
fast forward at least
your first memories. Talk about your family growing up. Where did you grow up, and what was the family dynamic like for you?
Well, I grew up in the heart of Kansas, Wichita, Kansas, in particular. Some people would call it a city. I don't know. I'd probably call it more like a town at that particular time, but. I grew up in a rather large family. I have an older brother and 3 younger sisters, and I don't know. I think of us today as an all-American middle, maybe a little bit lower class family. Working father, mom stay at home for the most part. She did some work periodically here and there, but she pretty much stayed home. And I have memories of, playing hide and seek, kick the can. Kids played outside and hung around the neighborhood, and you developed relationships that way.
Yeah.
That was just the way we were. And, both my mother and father's side of the family came from farms, so family get-togethers were always at the farm, and the women in the kitchen cooking fried chicken and mashed potatoes, and the men sitting out on a stump smoking cigarettes and telling big fish stories and lying about everything under the planet, trying to one-up each other.
Sure.
but that was us, and the kids were out playing around on the farm. I was sitting on the tractor and tossing rocks at the pigs and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's where I grew up.
Yeah. Did you grow up in a family that valued faith? So when I think about America and kind of Americana, that idea, there's a cultural aspect of faith, that everyone is a person of faith, right?
Absolutely.
But what was that like for you? Was it a family that valued faith and time in the Bible, or was it something you had to figure out later on in your life?
Oh no, we were at church every Sunday at the First Baptist Church in Wichita, and then later on to another church, Beth Eden. The First Baptist Church kind of splintered and went off two different directions. Part of the family went to one side, and another part went to the other side. Church politics, I guess, is what you call it. But yeah, I went to church, I guess as long as I can, probably up through 11 years old, and then something happened that fractured all of that, and Mom and Dad stopped going to church.
Interesting.
And I later found out that it was, again, church politics. My dad did probably where I get a lot of my basis of doing volunteer work. My dad did a lot of work for the church. He built things. He built cabinets and did construction in the church and built pews and things like that. And something caused a fissure in that relationship. But I always knew my dad was a faithful man. I remember things like. He wouldn't recite scripture, but he would say things like, now I'm losing my thought on what he would say, but I know he would pick things out of the Bible,
refer to concepts
and refer to it, right? And I think that developed my sense of worth and developed my life predominantly for the rest of my life.
Yeah,
I know it did.
What caused you to leave that setting and go into the military?
That's kind of funny. My dad was not military because he had asthma, or he was suspected that he had tuberculosis at one time in his life. He had two brothers that were in the military. One was in the Army, fought in World War II. The other one was in the Navy, fought in World War II. So there wasn't that sense of dedication to the military, but I was a trumpet player from starting in elementary school all the way through into high school, and that got me into a drum and bugle corps.
Oh wow!
And at that time, drum and bugle corps were very disciplined organizations. I knew how to march at 13 years old. I knew what a right and left face was, and stand at attention and all of that. But I had a paper route where I delivered about 200 plus newspapers twice a day. And when I'd go through to collect, I had conversations with people. In one particular household, their son was a Vietnam veteran Marine. And every time I went to collect for the newspaper, I'd spend 30 minutes talking about their son as a Marine.
Yeah.
And I knew that was going to be my destiny.
When was that? Roughly, what year would that have been?
That started around 1969, I guess.
So Vietnam was still happening.
Yeah.
That's what was in the news, and that's what made it interesting.
Very much so. And I followed that, Dan Rather and Walter Cronkite and all of that. People. I'm giving away my age now.
I've heard of these people.
But I think that was indelibly planted in my head. As a matter of fact, I started going down to Marine Corps recruiters' offices and just bugging them all the time. All the time.
Yeah.
Master Sergeant Poole, I remember that name religiously. And I just stayed in touch with them and all the way through high school. As a matter of fact, it'll kind of lead to another little story, but that almost got upended because I got into a little bit of not heavy drugs, marijuana, with some friends, and actually got arrested one night when I was 17. had an altered driver's license in my hip pocket that said I was older than 17.
So you're doing some good things.
Oh yeah, I was doing some.
Life, right?
I was going down a.
It's good to see things just don't change.
I was going down a path I probably should not have been going down, but I did. Peer pressure, wanted to fit in, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, long story short is, got arrested in December before my January 18th birthday, and thought that was going to be the end of everything. I was going to go a different direction, but had a good attorney, and he told me to flush my altered driver's license down the toilet. And when we went to court, he showed my birth certificates, which showed that I was a minor, and the judge says, "What are you doing in my court? You're supposed to be in juvenile court." So he bound me over to juvenile court, but it was a timing issue, and my attorney said, if they don't get you through juvenile court by the time you turn 18, you're free. And on my birthday, I went down and told Master Sergeant Poole, put me in the Marine Corps.
Do it today.
Do it right now. And I never had another puff of marijuana after that. And he put me in delayed entry. I wanted to go then, drop out of high school and go then. He says, He says, I will go to every one of your classes and make sure you're in class to make sure you graduate, and you'll thank me later. And I do.
You know what's crazy? Did you ever do recruiting? Were you ever?
Yes, I was a recruiter. Yeah.
So I've heard, many times over the years talking to Marines, how a recruiter who has a job and he's trying to accomplish something did that, really influence their life, changed the direction of their life, made sure they graduated, and all of those things. I think we sometimes overlook the value of that person at that moment in time in your life.
Well, and I think I've shaped my life by major points that have happened in my life, and Master Sergeant Poole was one of those. And by the way, he did come to one of my classes.
Just to make sure?
Just to make sure. He stood outside until I finished that class because he knew I was failing it. And I barely passed that class, but I did pass it, and I graduated and went to boot camp, 10 days later.
Yeah. What year did you go to boot camp?
1973.
1973. So the Vietnam War was still happening.
Yeah. Kind of wrapping down,
up, and things were changing. A lot of people were coming home.
Right.
Crazy time to go into the military. I don't know, the history of all branches of the military in the late 70s and early 80s, but I know for the Marine Corps it was a terrible time. Organizationally, from a discipline standpoint. Yeah. Kind of the dark days of the Marine Corps were that mid to late 70s to mid 80s.
Well, and the big factor was what was happening at home as a result of the Vietnam War, and I'll go to my older brother, hair down to his butt.
Right.
Had an American flag upside down sewn on the butt of his pants.
Yeah.
It was that type of culture that I don't want to say they were wrong, because they had an opinion, and that's the basis of our country, is you have a right to speak.
Sure.
And I knew from my particular perspective that I was representing their right to have that word.
Sure.
And I believed in that at the core of me.
Yeah.
I really did.
And that's something, right now at this moment in time, we're really struggling with as a nation, is the right to express yourself, the right to speak, or right, or whatever the case, peacefully. That's a right that we have.
It is.
And that's a right that is, I won't say being taken away, we may get there, but it certainly is being suppressed with this idea that we should not say anything that violates someone else's sense of right and wrong.
Yeah. And who's to say what is right and what is wrong? We'll probably get to it, but I have a very firm belief that the only entity that has a right to say what is right and wrong is God.
Yeah, that's right. When in those years, at the beginning of your time in the service, why was there so much friction? Why were there so many discipline problems? Why was it because that generation was coming into the military and they had learned different, they had been taught different, they didn't value America the same way. What was happening at that time that caused the major upheaval in the United States military at that time?
Well, I think there was two major things. Is the flower child revolution that drugs, sex, and rock and roll were the dominant themes. But there was also another piece that I've studied quite a bit, and that was racism. And Black America was in upheaval, and they were representing that. And after I finished my MOS schools and ended up in Okinawa, I saw that up close and personal. You had barracks that were where the Black Marines were in pockets, and you didn't dare violate that. At least I didn't violate it because I had a good, I'll call it a healthy sense of fear that I didn't know what this bumping fists and all that stuff was all about at the time, because, I was raised pretty much on my father's side that the color of a man or a woman's skin has nothing to do with anything. People are people, and we got to respect and love each other as best we can. Yep. And so I didn't relate to that. My mom was quite on the other side. She would use the N-word frequently, and that always rubbed me the wrong direction. But I think those two factors at the end of the Vietnam War, which was an unpopular war, was causing a tremendous amount of friction in our society and our culture. And I saw both sides of it, because I saw what my brother was doing. He was heavy into the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and thank God he found another way. Eventually. He's a very successful man and a very devout Christian right now. And but that, I think that's about how we can transform and transfigure ourselves into something else. If the pain gets heavy enough.
If there's enough pain. And that's instructive for us now. The military has always been more conservative than culture. The military has always had higher standards. That word can mean a lot of different things, but standards, discipline and behavior and those kind of things, than the rest of culture. However, the military will always reflect culture at some point. And that's what you're saying, is because the culture was in such upheaval, all the things that were happening in the civil rights movement to the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, that eventually was reflected in the military.
Absolutely. I think it just kind of morphed because, we Black Americans were a large percentage of the Vietnam War, and a lot of people don't understand that. There's a new movie that Spike Lee is releasing here pretty soon that talks about that dynamic. And I watched the previews of it, and I said, yeah, he's got it right. And I don't think America understood that, because we were just coming out of the Deep South, where there were still segregated toilets, and blacks had to sit in the back of the bus and in the back of the classroom, or in some cases they didn't even get to sit in a white classroom. And I think that was a poor definition of America at that time, and unfortunately it had lived since the time of the emancipation all the way into the 60s and even through the 70s and 80s. And I'm not convinced that we're still through that, because we still talk about it.
So the period of Reconstruction after the Civil War, had Lincoln remained in office, things may have been different. I think certainly they would have. But what's interesting about humans is we like to put ourselves in camps, and we like to segregate, and I don't mean that in a racial sense, but segregate ourselves. The people we know, the people we like, by interest, by family, by background. That's what we do, and it seems that for whatever reason, again, we're talking about this isolation, this segregation, this friction based on people groups. And I think the way it's being handled in culture is not healthy either right now. What did the military do to bring that ship back around. We had a conversation, Chad and myself and Sergeant Major Kent, not too long ago, Carlton Kent, the 16th Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, and we talked about racism. That's what racism and some of those aspects, and the fact that my experience was that a Marine is a Marine. We talk about shades of green, but everybody's green,
yep.
right? And there is that, and so I know racism exists in the military, but it is not a predominant. No one cares, particularly in the combat arms, because we're all trying to do a job.
Well, I don't think we had time for that to happen. Meaning you don't have time to think about putting somebody in a box. You got to, the concept, my concept of the Marine Corps is you get it done. You ask questions, but you ask them in a respectful way.
Sure.
And if you don't get the answer that you're looking for, I call it shopping for an answer. Yeah. You got to let it go.
But how did the military go from fractured, broken, segregated to that? How did that happen?
Well, I think in the late 70s we started. I think the Marine Corps was, and in many of the military services, and I saw it on recruiting duty, is the check mark of who you are by your classification. That didn't matter any longer. And I think that was a sense of patriotism that just started to bleed
by your
in.
Racial classification, is that what you mean?
Yeah,
okay.
racial,
yeah.
Well, even gender classifications, because, there was a push when I hit recruiting duty in, the late 70s, that, they pushed to start upping the number of women in the Marine Corps. And that was one of those things where you're forcing things to happen.
Sure.
And that kind of bothered me in a way, even though I was a great recruiter of women.
I have no doubt, Gary, no doubt.
The gift of gab, I guess. But I think that was the early beginnings of change, and the rest of America wasn't following that.
Yeah, right.
They wanted to keep people in boxes, and I don't want to say who they is. Sure. I have a sneaky suspicion I know who they is, and it starts with a G, but and that continues to be perpetuated. It's kind of interesting. I just had a discussion on my daily meeting with my colleagues, which is a very nice, diverse group of people, and they're wonderful, and we all get along because we don't check a box that you were this and you were this, and this is what you have between your legs, and that sort of thing. It doesn't matter. But yet, companies today are still getting immersed in identity and diversity and inclusion. And I asked the question in the meeting. I says, "Why are we doing this? What's the goal?
Yeah.
What are we going to achieve? We've been doing this. I'm going to be 66 years old here in a week or so. And why are we still asking the question? When I see it on a questionnaire, I select the last answer as I'm not going to answer this because to me it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Why should it matter?
Right.
And I think that's where division, and that's where the real division is if we keep telling people to check a box and we put them in a box, we're not going to progress.
Yeah.
And that's really, really unfortunate in our society.
And it's a strong tool for politicians and others and
it is.
Governments to use, because they can separate us, they can divide us. It's kind of a divide and conquer, and they can then deal with the groups that they want to. But you're right. Inclusion means really no one cares who you are, where you come from. If you can do your job and you can do your job well, then you're welcome here.
Yeah, and I think that stuff gets in the way.
Gets in the way.
Anyhow,
Yeah.
I worked with a wonderful gentleman, a colleague, last year when I was doing some consulting at USAA, and I know his background, but that didn't matter. Because why should it matter?
Because he was good at
what he does, and we had lots of discussions, and we disagreed about things. But guess what? At the end of the day, we developed a relationship of being friends and colleagues, and that's what really mattered.
And now we're being told that if you are different, and here are all the differences. If you're different, then you have to be at odds with each other.
Yeah.
And that's creating the problems.
Yeah.
So you lived through all that. And it's such an interesting, kind of historical perspective, particularly now, again, looking at a lot of these things coming back around. And even the military trying to deal with a lot of these issues that they haven't dealt with in a long time. What was your service like? You retired from the Marine Corps. How long did you serve?
Well, I served for 8.5 years initially. I was on recruiting duty at the end of my second enlistment. And when it came time for re-enlistment, the recruiting commander says, "You're not leaving." I says, "Oh, yes, I am. I don't want to do this anymore." So I left in 1981, the end of the year, and went back to Wichita and joined the Wichita, Kansas Police Department, and did that for 2 years. And then I had a couple very significant events, two in particular that really stand out. And I said, I think the Marine Corps is a safer place, actually.
So Wichita Police Department, and then went back to?
Then I went back in the Marine Corps in 1984 and stayed until I retired in 1995, September.
Yeah. And in that time, you deployed to a number of places, I'm sure.
Well, the first part of my career, I did travel a lot. I did Okinawa, Japan first, as that was my first overseas tour. That's where I started really learning about, if you want to learn about culture, travel through the world.
Yes.
And it'll teach you.
Yeah.
So right after my 1-year tour in Okinawa, these guys came along and says, "Hey, we've got a new program called Embassy Duty. Would you like to join up?"
Yeah.
Young corporal. And I said, "Yeah, I got to do that. Heck yeah."
Yeah.
So went to Henderson Hall in Arlington, Virginia, and went through that school and learned to become providing security for American embassies.
Yeah.
And my first embassy was Bamako, Mali, Africa.
Bamako, Mali, Africa. Wow.
Yeah, right in the heart of West Africa, right down the Timbuktu River, and the Niger River.
Yeah.
It started at Timbuktu and then ran south all the way through the southern part of West Africa. So, I hit Senegal on the way and Bamako, Mali, and while I was in Bamako, having a great time drinking and oh, I'm sorry, that's not what you're supposed to do on embassy duty. But,
except that everyone I know who's been on embassy duty, that's kind of how they spent their time.
When you're in the Marine House, your function is to raise money for the Marine Corps Ball every year, and the only way to do that is to sell booze and movies. Which we did, and we did a good job of it. I actually, since I was an office machine repairman, the projectors that were provided to us by the United States Information Service were all broke and they weren't working half the time. And I says, "Well, I'll fix them. Show me where the parts are." So the head of the UCIS showed me where his parts room was, and I kept projectors running and had 2 working at a time. So when we showed Gone with the Wind with 8 reels, it was almost like at the movie theater.
You just keep going.
Oh yeah. So, but we're out on the side of the swimming pool at the Marine House showing movies on the wall, and all of the American embassies and French embassies. They're those people are coming over, and we're selling drinks and sandwiches.
That's raising money for the ball.
Yeah. And we had a great Marine Corps ball at the ambassador's house, and I remember the Marine we called Pinky. He was walking around with 2 bottles of champagne, and one he was drinking from, and the other one he was serving. So he was.
And this is why organizations like the Mighty Oaks Foundation exist.
That's right.
That's that type of behavior right there.
And that all of that eventually, I'll tell you about in my second half. But anyway, went back in the Marine Corps. Thought I was going to stay in office machine repair, repairing computers and all of that. And unfortunately, they eliminated my MOS because they said, well, we can contract all that work out. So you're going to become an embarkation specialist.
Wow.
And even after they reassigned me to be an 04, I still stayed at electronic maintenance company in Camp Pendleton, and they said, nope, you're going to be an embarkation specialist.
No kidding. Wow.
So I got thrust into, I went to Little Creek, Virginia, and learned how to do all of that stuff. And since I already knew computers, I became a pretty good expert and developed new logistics systems based on automation.
Yeah.
That culminated at Desert Storm, as instead of taking a scale, quarter-inch scale deck diagram of a ship and cutting out representations of boxes and vehicles and pasting them on there and then taking them down, and I did that all on computer, and I helped the company develop that.
Incredible. Yeah, wow.
So we could actually, when we did those loads, we could actually compute the trim and stability of the ship, which the captains of the ships just loved because they didn't have to shift ballast and fuel all over the place. And I got good at that, so good at it that I spent the last 12 years almost totally deployed. Desert Storm, that was 9 total months in and out of ports in the Persian Gulf. And then back over again after a 5-month stay in the U.S. and then to Somalia, Kinshasa, Kenya, doing that deal there.
Yeah.
And of course, the nice part of it was his return trip. We stayed in Perth, Australia for a couple of weeks, and again, did a lot of drinking. And again, the reason Mighty Oaks was created was part of that.
For that type of behavior. Yeah. And then you retired in what year?
In 1993, after a rather significant event in 1995, but I had a significant event in 1993, which I think was completely responsible for changing my life. I was drinking heavy. I had 2 significant events. The first one was after Desert Storm, I was assigned to 4th Lad Battalion in Pasadena. That was supposed to be our rest and relaxation. And I had a S4 officer that was not a very nice man. He was a lot like me, very angry most of the time, and responded that way. Yelled at people and got in your face and that sort of thing. And I had set up a summer exercise in White Sands Missile Range, went out on an advance party, set up all the tents in the whole area and all of that, and was staying in this nice little metal shed while everybody else was in tents. And one day he came around and knocked on the door and says, "Why aren't you over in the GP tents?" I says, "Because this is where I've been since I've been here, Major." And he started yelling at me, and I said, "Major, if you don't get out of my face, I'm going to knock you out." And about 3 weeks later, I was on my way to alcohol treatment.
That was the sign he needed.
That was the sign he needed
to help you get help.
Yeah, it cost me $2,700. I did not get reduced in rank, thank God, and thanks to an old salt first sergeant that was looking out after me. But I did end up in alcohol treatment, and through alcohol treatment at Camp Pendleton, that's when they were really starting to get into a person's life. And they found out that I was exposed to some stuff as a kid that was very significant in my life.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say that caused the drinking, but it was a way to numb the confusion and all of that.
Yeah.
And they helped me work through that.
That's great. We and you know this, but a lot of the folks that we deal with, that we work with and try to help, we'll talk about military-related trauma or war-related trauma, combat trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, all these things that we talk about. But once you start to kind of break it down, what you see is that it was trauma that happened as a child that was never dealt with, that created a scenario where bad behavior was kind of the norm, and a lifetime of that, unless someone stands in to intervene, it can absolutely destroy you.
If you don't have that intervention, it will destroy you. I see that every day. I still see it today. I've got a very good friend that is struggling, and it didn't, he did a couple of tours in Afghanistan, but that's just asymptomatic of something that happened a lot earlier in his life, and I understand those dynamics. But when you have an RPG go off 10 feet from you, that starts cracking the surface, if you will, and trauma can manifest itself in a lot of different ways.
That's right.
I understand that because I had so much intervention early on, I think. Alcohol treatment and all of the accoutrements of that, and spending a year in group therapy type areas. That's why I thought that I didn't need Mighty Oaks.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
And I've always thought that I didn't need a lot of things. I didn't think I had. I didn't think I had post-traumatic stress because, I had this thought that, well, the only war that I really served in was Desert Storm, and I never got off the pier because my job was unloading the ships and putting everything back on. And as the last box came down on the deck, Colonel Heck drives up in a new Jeep Cherokee, and he says, "The war's over. Put it all back on." I didn't even have a sidearm.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
The only time I hit the field in Desert Storm in Saudi Arabia is I went bouncing out there in a 4K tactical forklift to deliver mail. That's all I did. Yeah. So I don't have any post-traumatic stress.
Right.
But, my time on the police department, two significant events. I had a young Native American that I busted downtown for breaking the glass out of a men's store. And I didn't know anything I didn't have any background on this kid. And he was, when we busted him, he was docile. Cuffed him, took him to the city jail, which was right across the street from the county jail. And even in the city jail, he was pretty docile. Well, once we finish all the booking procedures, we have to take him through a tunnel under the street over to the county jail, and then, turn him over there. As soon as I got this kid outside the door, and again, he's handcuffed behind him, and, I have to have, I've got my sidearm, and as soon as I got outside the door, this guy started going crazy and trying to go for my weapon, and actually got his hands on it.
Wow.
At the time, instinct kicks in, and you say, don't react to this, other than probably a lot of adrenaline was starting to pump about that time. It wasn't enough. And I tell you why, because the guy was on PCP, which is the scariest drug that you'll ever encounter of anybody in your entire life. If it wouldn't have been for the booking lieutenant hearing the scuffle going on, I have no doubt that I wouldn't be sitting here with you today. And I didn't make the connection that impacted my life severely for many years to come.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand that until I got to Sky Rose Ranch, and that's where it came out.
Yeah, and that's a significant point to make. Is often when we talk about trauma, we think of an event. Yeah. There is an event that's caused the many difficulties I'm experiencing in my life, relationally, and addictions and all those things. But really, for most people, it's not an event. It's a series of events over a long period of time. Yeah. Some are more traumatic than others. But then on the other side of that event, because we don't know how to deal with it, we still deal with it through bad behavior, through illicit relationships, and all the other things that we deal with. And so But it's easy to bury that, right, underneath all of this other stuff and say, I'm okay, I'm fine. Well, you're fine because you're a functioning alcoholic or because you've discovered coping mechanisms, but that doesn't mean you've ever dealt with the actual problems.
Right.
So, okay, so I want to jump into when you went to Mighty Oaks, but before that, the way that we connected kind of, and you connected with Mighty Oaks, we had been working with veterans as an organization and had a real desire to start working with the active duty community. And that was a desire born out of watching veterans who have struggled, as you just kind of described, lived that life, and on the other side of it, they don't know what to do, so we're trying to help them. And the thought was, if we can get out in front of that, if we can get some folks before they separate from the military, when they still have some stability, that's good for them, that's good for us, but how do we connect with the active duty community? And one of the challenges that we had was that we're a faith-based organization, and so we approached this as a faith-based organization, which means most people in the military say, well, we can't participate with that. Right. So we did the groundwork and worked with the active duty community and specifically the Wounded Warrior Battalion at Camp Pendleton to get permission to bring active duty military members, active duty service members into our program. So all we're asking for is that you cut them loose, don't charge them leave, let them come to a week at our program. And that seemed like a great thing until we realized that most of them didn't have a way to get to the program. So Camp Pendleton, if you're not familiar, is in Southern California. It's in San Diego County. Sky Rose Ranch, where we run one of our programs, is in Central California, so a few hundred miles away, 300 miles away, I think. 340 miles away, something like that. And so you have Marines, we've worked it out so they have permission. The Marine Corps actually did provide a van and a driver one time. And then someone said, oh, we can't do that. That's a faith-based program. So we have permission, we have willing participants, we just have no way to get them to us. And you and a couple of other guys from your church.
Actually, just me.
Initially, just
beginning, you. Pastor Matthew had said, Gary, we've got this program called Mighty Oaks Foundation, and they don't have a way to get warriors up to Paso Robles. And he says, would you take care of that? He says, I'll chip in whatever I need to chip in. He says, as a matter of fact, we're going to have to rent vans from Enterprise. And I embarked on that, and my wife and I actually did that for close to a year.
It's incredible. And the church eventually bought a van, I think, to do that as well. I think, or they started using one of their own vehicles or something.
Yeah, something like that.
The church got behind it, but you started bringing people up, and I remember when we met the first time you were up there, because you drive them up and drop them off, and drive back, and then come back and get them.
Well, I'd usually go drive them up, and I'd stay overnight.
But then drive home.
And then drive home, then come back on graduation and pick them up.
And that was really, that's what made it possible for us to have those active duty service members. And then, again, as you mentioned, other people got involved in that, and then a lot has, organizationally, we've been able to do some things since then that have made it possible as well. But through all of that, you're volunteering, you don't have any problems, you're fine, everything's okay.
Right.
But you get to know Mighty Oaks, you start to work with us, you help us in a lot of different things, from technology standpoint, others. And then eventually you came to a session.
Yeah. I came to a session because my son was leaning on me quite a bit. My son is a Navy veteran, 9-year Navy veteran, and spent a great deal of time in Iraq. With a drug dog. He and his dog would go find drug caches in heavily combat type areas. I really think that he found all the drug caches for Saddam Hussein, because he and his dog would vert rep from Kuwait, which is only about 5 miles north of where I was at, into Iraq and the idea is Al Qaeda was financing their operations through heroin. Well, you shut down the heroin supply, you shut down their supply.
Sure. You shut down the money, right?
And I think that impacted quite a lot. And he and his dog had taken a tumble. He blew out both of his knees and has a little bit of TBS, traumatic brain injury, as a result of that injury. And started through the VA system, which is I think that's probably a discussion for a whole, that's
right.
probably 2-hour discussion for another time. But the result of it is he said, he knew about my anger problems, which had not really subsided. And he says, Dad, you need to get evaluated. Well, I don't have any problems. Dad, get evaluated. And I did. I got evaluated.
Yeah.
And I says, I thought I had taken care of everything through the group counseling, through alcohol treatment, and a lot of counseling. I'm one that if I've got a problem, I need to go out and search for an answer, and I can't do that on my own. I can't develop that on my own. I've got to find intervention because of the intervention that I had for alcohol treatment. But as a result of that, I says, I think I walked into your office and I says, Jeremy, I think I need to go. And he says, I think he said something like,
I've been telling you that for like 3 years.
Yeah, what have you been waiting for? So I asked my boss, I says, I need some time off. I need a week off.
Yeah.
And it was a discovery, a huge discovery, and hardly any of it was related to time in the Marine Corps, other than with the major up at 4th Lad Battalion and some of the other things that happened. But most of it was really related to my time on law enforcement. I almost got fired from the police department because I lied to them about an incident. If I just would have told the truth, it would have been
sure.
But it's things like that, and 3 marriages that I needed more change.
Yeah.
And that's where I realized that it doesn't matter how old you are, or where you come from, or who you are. Everybody can use change and discovery.
Yeah. And that's where I think faith became personal to you.
Very personal.
Yeah. Why is that so important in the process of, I'd say, you say change, I would say transformation. I mean, it's really, it's a complete turning. Why is faith the piece that unlocks that?
Well, I've been through the VA's post-traumatic stress disorder, as they call it, sessions, and I think that's all very good stuff, but it's secular in nature. And I've learned through another program that I've been through with my local church here. I went through 8 months of training to learn how to become a biblical counselor.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, I'm very impacted by things that I hear. The leader of that, the pastor that led that training and that education, said that you are God's ambassador here for your children, for anybody else that you're associated with.
Yeah.
And I already knew that my purpose in life and here is to serve.
Yeah.
And that's personal. That has become very personal, as you can tell, that I serve a God.
Yeah.
And if I don't give back, if I don't help people with my experiences, how I've been able to transform and heal and learn, then I'm not doing God's work. And, I think that's what God intended with his apostles. It's not that I want you to tell people my story, because my story helps transform people.
Yeah.
And the other part of Christian counseling program is is that secular counseling and psychology deals with the body and the mind. We need to deal with the soul, which is probably the crucial and most prominent missing part in transforming somebody's life. You've got to hit body, mind, and soul.
Yeah.
And the soul part is where we make a difference at Mighty Oaks.
Yep. Yeah, without a connection to our Creator, we're never going to really be able to figure out how to move forward. We have to know from whence we came and the purpose for which we were created. And until we understand that, we're going to have a very, very difficult time, navigating life. And the transparency part of that is so critical, which is something that I think secular counseling, and I'm certainly not against secular counseling. I think there's a lot of good tools that can be given in secular counseling.
Absolutely.
But I think one of the things it lacks is, here's my story,
right,
and here's how I want to use that story to help you move forward. And what we do and what you do and what you're talking about there is exactly that. It's, I have been where you've been. I struggle the way that you struggle, but God has given me the ability to move forward, and that's what I want to share with you.
Yeah, and I even shared that with the VA programs. They have what they call a cognitive processing therapy, which actually is very good, and it's some great tools to help you stop, look, and listen. And I think they do. I think they're learning their lessons by that. But I had a discussion with them. I says, we need to understand the soul, and it doesn't matter what walk of life that you come from. If you believe that there is a God Almighty that has your back, and that is going to pick you up no matter where you're at, what you've done, or what you have done, and that includes anybody in prison as well, is if you don't reach out and grab hold of that and embrace it, you can't move forward.
That's right.
You're stuck. You're just stuck in a morass that you cannot climb out of with any other methodology than if you take care of that soul. And my soul is a work in progress.
Sure. Do you feel like the military is beginning to understand that, or is that such a foreign concept to them that it's going to continue to take outside organizations like ours to speak to that piece?
We cannot give up on that. If we give up on it, we fail. Do I think that they'll understand it? I think some will understand it, but when you have the dialogue that is going on in our government institutions that try to achieve equality when we already have equality, the dialogue is going to make that extremely difficult.
We're focused on the wrong target.
That's right.
And thankfully, it's been my experience at least that there are many people within the government, within these organizations, individuals who are open to at least letting it happen. And that's what we've always talked about with the military is, we're not asking you to do anything. We're not even asking you to believe that what we do is is the best thing. We're just asking you to give us a chance, to give your folks a chance. And I think that's where that dialogue has to continue.
Well, as it's funny, getting back to the time that I drove so many warriors up to Skyros, to listen to the dialogues going up, profanity and and the dialogues, these people aren't going to be able to help me. I've been through this program, this program, this program. They're not going to be able to help me. And some of them that say, for some reason they had to profess that, well, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in any of that crap. And then what was really cool and for me is to see that transformation when I went back on Thursday evening and sat around a campfire with these guys and watch guys get baptized. And it wasn't getting baptized as a sense of I want to fit in with the rest of the group. It's a sense that you got hold of the soul. and you transform their soul to where they realize, wow, I can't do this by myself.
Yeah.
I have to do this with my with other warriors that understand where I've walked, and corpsmen are especially stand out to me. Wow. You know, Marines, we think we're the rough and tough and all of that, but climb up next to a corpsman at a Mighty Oaks session and understand what those guys have seen and done, and it's just truly amazing and transformational to see that. I have to be a part of that because I'm God's ambassador.
Yeah.
And I got to continue to get that message out. And if I do it by keeping the wire running through here so you can get it outside the building, then I think that I'm God's ambassador. I would love to become an instructor up there if I could get the time off work, and I can't. So guess what? I'll serve how I can. Sitting in this chair right now, I'm serving.
That's right. That's awesome. Gary, thanks for the conversation.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we'll talk some more, I'm sure. For those that are watching and listening, if you heard this and maybe some part of Gary's story connected to you or to someone that you care about, a lot of great people involved in what we do, and I'll say this, we work very hard to make it possible for anyone to attend a program that they don't have to pay for. It's a week long in one of 4 locations across the country. We cover the cost of the program, and we cover the cost of travel. That's why it was so important, early on, we were trying to get these guys up there, is how do we do that? And when I say we, sometimes it's partnerships with churches and others who make that possible, but there's no cost to the student. There's no cost to the person attending, because we want to remove every obstacle that we can to make it possible for you to get to a place where you have what Gary just described. And so if that's you, if you're interested in that, please go to our website, mightyoaksprograms.org. You'll find a place to apply. If you're not quite ready for that, you'll find a lot of other great information there. And we'd love to invite you to apply. We have men's programs, we have women's programs, and that's for one very simple reason. Men are a little more open when it's just men. Women are a little more open when it's just women, and we have found that that's the best approach for us. But that includes spouses. So if you are the service member and you have a spouse that would be able to attend, that would be fantastic. We would encourage you to sign up and be a part of that, and that would be great. Programs for veterans, active duty service members, and first responders. And again, it's our honor to be able to do that. Please take advantage of it. It's there for you, and we'd love to include you in that. Thank you again for watching or listening. For those of you that are listening and not watching, go over to YouTube, find our channel, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and we'd love to continue to share this information with you. Thank you. We'll see you next week.